I'm delighted to be with Dick Skipworth. Dick founded the third largest semiconductor business in the world called Memec. I believe it was founded in 1974 from a back bedroom.
That's correct.
And somewhat inauspicious start in your first year, your entire profits were wiped out when all of your stock was stolen.
So that's very true, Kate.
And then I think it was in 1980 you floated the business, and it was
81,
and it was about 58 times oversubscribed, which is phenomenal.
Was, yes, yeah.
And then
there were heady times. Those were particularly in the semiconductor industry.
I can't remember. You actually bought the business back for about 760 million, as I understand it, and it was a significant business then.
Yes, it was in 2000 when it more or less peaked in 2000, really, when I think our sales were $3.3 billion, and we had nearly 3,000 employees at the time. So it was a significant business. Yes. To say bought it back, I mean, what happened there was that Weber was going into a partnership with the other big utilities company in Europe. And of course, they're now known as E.ON, of course, E.ON. But as part of that move, there was some sort of an agreement that each company would divest their non-core businesses. And of course, their core business was utilities, chemicals, and oil and chemicals and coal.
Yes.
And so that it was in late 1999, I think, when they announced this, and I think I was told before the announcement that this was going to happen, and I immediately put my hand up and said, okay, we'll buy it back, having no idea how to buy it back. And actually the buyback, because the business was, you know, if you compared it with what we sold in 1991, 92 to what it was in 2000. I mean, valuations had gone from something like, I don't know, $150 million to $850 million. I was quite a small player, really, in the actual buyback, because, as I say, it was a very, very big number then. And if you looked at it from the Weber side, they were not just interested in selling Memec. They wanted to sell Weber Electronics, which consisted of Memec, Wiley, and EBV in Germany. So that's what they were looking at. I was only interested in Memec, basically, because, as I said before, I had tried to preserve that, what I considered to be a fairly unique way of operating. But when it came to a sale, they were looking at selling Weber Electronics, and Weber Electronics was then something over 11 billion in sales, $11 billion in sales worldwide. So that was a significant number, and of course things were doing extremely well in 2000. Everybody was making profits, everybody was making money. And it took over a year, in fact, to do this, because Weber had appointed some pretty high-level banks to broker this deal.
And it's been a really interesting journey for you.
It was extremely interesting, because it was very, very different. And I had, after putting my hand up and saying we'd buy it back,
perfect.
I had to think how to do it. And I had known a gentleman who was involved in very much the private equity business, which was at that time Schroeder Ventures. And Peter Smitham, who I'd known for quite a long time. And I think I was in San Francisco at the time, and I called Peter, because this was about a week after I put my hand up, see. And I called Peter, and I got his secretary, and she said, "Oh, Mr. Skipworth, that's a coincidence. Peter just asked me to find you." So he'd heard about
serendipity there,
this
for
going
sure.
on, you see. And So in the end, Schroeder Ventures led the buyback, but it was done really as a consortium between Schroeder Ventures, Arrow and Avnet. And Arrow and Avnet were our biggest competitors.
And of course, subsequently bought the business.
Arrow took part of it, Avnet took part, and we had Memec back, and we thought at a very good price.
Yes.
Running a company that had been a private company and a public company, and then had an owner that was very cash rich and very supportive, and then finding yourself owned by a private equity group.
Yes.
That's very different.
Yeah.
And I virtually stepped off in 2003 and left the running of the group to really a young protege, David Ashworth, to run the group. And eventually in 2005, the group was sold to Avnet.
Yes.
And I was free to go and play with my motor cars.
But prior to that, one question that certainly interests me is that you have got a great reputation for being a great leader, in that people admire how you lead, and you have a great ability to pick the right people, but then to let them do their thing and go off and be autonomous. And certainly, I suppose, listening to people and reading things in the press, there's that leadership style that is very, very supportive and nurturing.
I almost want to say it's because I'm lazy, but and it goes back somewhat to the beginning, Kate, because I was trained as an engineer, basically, and I had a couple of engineering jobs, and then I got recruited into technical sales by a American semiconductor company, and that was a pretty hard transition from being a quiet engineer to having to go out and knock on people's doors.
Gosh, absolutely. It couldn't be more different,
But
really.
no, it couldn't be more different. And for the first 6 months, I hated it. But after 6 months, I really began to enjoy it, because I was seeing all sorts of different things. And of course, it was at a time when there was tremendous innovation in the industry. I mean, and it wasn't a tough selling job, really, because we had products that people wanted to know about.
And they were new and innovative.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And that was great. And I was with that company for 7 years. It's an American company. And then we hit the first recession, really, in the semiconductor industry, because the semiconductor industry has been cyclical. You could almost plot it over the years, sort of every 5 years. And this was, I think, in 1972 when we hit the first sort of downturn in the industry. I was responsible for sales in Europe, basically, and I was working for the UK company. And this was a subsidiary of the American company. And in the first recession, of course, there's cutbacks, and then there's often changes of bosses. And I think in that period from 1972 to 73, I had I think about 3 different bosses, all American, coming over and changing things, of course, which were necessary. I mean, they were necessary changes. But I made the really big mistake in about 1973 when you know, I disagreed with the third one, and of course he kicked me out. Because I'm a firm believer that you don't often get sacked for incompetence, but you always get sacked for disagreeing with your boss.
Yes, more likely, for sure. More common, should I say? Definitely.
And so at that period, I was out of a job, and there wasn't any similar jobs available. And But I'd met in America quite a number of people who'd set up in their own independent sales businesses. And I decided to have a go, really. Well, I didn't have much choice, really. I had to find something. I had a wife and three children to look after, so yeah. And that's when it really started. And Memec started in 1974. There was sort of a false start before that, but the company really started in April 1974. And from 1974, 75, 76, I suppose I was doing just about everything you could do in a small company, as one does, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was doing about everything, you know.
Yeah.
And a very good friend of mine said to me once, he said, you know, if this company is going to go anywhere, he said, you've got to give some responsibility to other people. And you'll definitely plateau if you're doing it all yourself. And he said something that I've always tried to remember. He said, you know, when you give it to other people, he said, probably 50% won't do it as well as you would have done it. But the other 50% will probably do it better. And try to remember that going through. And it is very true. It is very true. A lot of people will do it better than you would have done it. Yeah. And mind you, selecting the right ones to do that is another matter.
I sense that you have a great ability to pick the right people. If you sort of people that talk about having worked for you, and there's evidence of people out there that now run their own businesses, successful businesses. So I'm wondering, is that down to how you led them? It must be, you know, and the opportunities you gave them.
Selecting people, as you probably know, is a very difficult task, and there were certain things I used to look for in people, and it's quite right. I've interviewed quite a lot of people in the time, sure. And I come from a small farming background. Basically, I was born and raised a tenant farmer's son in North Lincolnshire, and I was the fifth of five as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's probably why I left home at 16, because there wasn't much left out of a small tenanted farm, you know. And I often asked people when I was interviewing them for various jobs, you know, what their other interests were and what their backgrounds were. And I usually found if there was some sort of agricultural background there, that they were probably quite adaptable and quite resourceful, because I'd known from my own experience that on a small farm you've got to be quite resourceful. You know, you've got to fix things when they go wrong and things like that. And so I was always looking for that. This is an old adage, really. I always never tried to ask anybody to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. Yeah. You know, was the other thing, really.
It's an amazing journey, though, and an incredibly inspiring story. You know, about the business that you founded and you've grown, and you know, is now third largest in the world. It's incredible. But who or what inspires you? Where do you get your inspiration from?
I was, as I said before, I was the fifth of five in the family, and a good way behind my nearest sister. In fact, 14 years.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So quite a gap.
So I think, to some extent, I had to grow up in a grown-up's world to some extent, and maybe that's got something to do with it. Certainly, I was always competitive. Always wanted to compete, and particularly at school. Was actually a reasonable runner at one time.
Fantastic. Well, there's evidently
Long time ago.
there's evidently a steely motivation there. I suppose what tips would you give to maybe other people that are thinking about changing their career, following their passion, doing something new?
I think there's no substitute for actually doing. Don't get me wrong, but doing something. So many people I've seen who, a lot of people have approached me and they say, well, I really start my own business. And they analyse the thing to the nth degree, but they never do anything. And sure as anything, if you just do things, and it's almost like, I've heard people say, that he was successful in business because he didn't know any better. And I think there is a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, you have to get out and do it sometimes,
Get out and do something, because, and, sure as anything, there's going to be a good percentage of that that's going to be wrong. But hopefully there'll be a few percent that'll be right too. But if you never do it, it's never going to happen. And I think it's hard to, and I think there is quite a lot in it, that, he was successful because he didn't know any better.